just give me art for art's sake.
Okay.
Why art?
Don't look at me.
Yeah, tell me, what do you think?
No, you start.
Well, I think that part of the conversation is who has always been able to talk about what art is, right? Like who gets to decide or define it. Like a lot of the misinterpretation or the misunderstanding about what makes art comes out of like who has always had the power to decide what art is, right? And what the purpose of art is. And so one of the things that I think that artists keep doing is sort of like knocking that down and like imagining new ways and new forms of art. And so oftentimes I think if we look to the margins, we can see some of the most beautiful manifestations of art sort of currently being made.
Yeah. Well, I paint and I write. So the question's personal to me, but it's also kind of an intellectual, historical question. And I would just say this. I think the tragedy of modernity is that post the Bloomsbury group in England that basically criticized figurative art as old-fashioned and said we now have to worship the postmodern abstraction, that kind of got ingrained in what we're doing to the point where there has been a disassociation of craft and art. And I think in one way that's great in that it makes art less bound to rules. But on the other hand, if you look at why we have art, it's because people, not to make it too artsy-fartsy, began to decorate things. And then those decorations became as important as the utility of the object. And then all of a sudden they said, let's not decorate a sword or a spear anymore. Let's just make this
Art for art's sake.
art for art's sake. So essentially, one of my battles is I love conceptual work within art, but I also am a big fan of hands-on creativity and not making art an intellectual exercise that's cut off from getting your hands dirty.
Exactly.
So so that basically, I think for me, that's where there's a lot of discussion, particularly in our day and age when so much is conceptual.
Well, and I also think, so a few things you said. First, I want to go all the way back to the piece where you said that where art came from was wanting to decorate things, because I actually think it's born out of an even deeper place. That as human beings, we are hungry to make beauty.
Right.
And so I think visual art is one manifestation, just like sound, sometimes beautiful, sometimes like sorrowful, like all of that maker energy comes from a really deep desire to engage the beauty that we experience in the world or that we see in one another. And so I think that's, for me, one of the starting places for art. And that's a piece that I think folks are disconnected from sometimes. And so for me, art for art's sake is, the answer is like, where do we tap in to that hunger? Where do we help people open up to that or recognize that or take a deep breath and realize that it's in them? And so one way to do that is to make art accessible.
Yeah, and I think actually, though, what you're saying, and the way I would put it, and completely agree with you, is that the basic value of art reflects a bigger issue, and that is what I would call the intrinsic worth of beauty. I grew up in an evangelical background where everything had to be justified by something else. So marriage wasn't just marriage, it was a picture of Christ in the church. Sex wasn't just sex, it was a bond that would make a sacred marriage stick together. Art wasn't just art, it had to have a gospel message. So you got all this horrible Christian rock and roll in the 70s and 80s where they're trying to put messages in to get people saved rather than making good music.
Right.
But I think a lot of the post-70s art movement actually does the same thing. And that is, it always looks for a higher meaning when the art is the higher meaning, because it's that hunger you're talking about. And the way, just to repeat myself, the intrinsic worth of beauty is the deal.
Yeah.
So either beauty has intrinsic worth or it doesn't. And it's interesting you have tattoos, not to change the subject, just hold them up for the camera. I'm speaking of these. If you've never seen a tattoo before, it's a form of body painting, but it's permanent. The first decorative arts that are recorded in history and anthropology is not on caves. It's body. It's body art.
True.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
What I would say is two things: the intrinsic worth of beauty and the non-utility of it.
Yes.
Because what does this do
There's
for
no
you? It
reason.
doesn't get you to heaven.
Right.
It doesn't make you rich, and
Right.
it won't feed you.
Right.
But they were doing this before they could talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting
Yeah.
point.
I think that's true.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
intrinsic worth of beauty.
Yeah. So sometimes as an artist, I find myself talking about both, I'll say, like trying to think sort of through some of these questions. So when I think about, as a fine artist, here are some of my priorities or goals or what I'm trying to create. And I'm thinking about it from like the aesthetics of it and the theory behind it, or I have an idea that I want to convey, and I sort of rely on my fine arts training
Yeah.
to try to achieve that. And I think that is really the folks who work and wrestle in that craft and build sort of their capacity for both appreciation and creation of art is an important element. Just thinking about sort of what you were saying earlier about intellectualizing, but also that accessibility piece. But sometimes I think that for me, I just need to ask the questions of like, well, what's it for, like for this particular moment, right? So tonight at Wild Goose during Jay Quest's performance, we're going to do some action painting, and we're going to invite anybody in the audience who wants to come participate. And that's about like the experiential, accessing the creative process, the invitational piece, the getting your hands dirty piece. And so I think it's a both and.
And by the way, just to break in again, the same thing I talked about your tattoos, that ritual experience of art is probably what was going on in those caves in the south of France 50,000 years ago, where you see all those handprints.
Yeah.
I don't see one guy going like this. I see somebody like me with his 5 grandchildren in there
Just
going like this.
Yeah.
Let's just do this, and maybe somebody's beating on a hollow log, maybe they're celebrating whatever.
Right? Maybe they're rapping.
Maybe they're rapping.
Yeah.
Maybe they're, their own version of Wild Goose, but it was definitely, so I'm not saying because art is related to craft and this intrinsic worth of beauty, it's therefore not communal, but I'm just saying I don't like to see the link broken between that hands-on connection and simply becoming an intellectualized concept. To sort of change the subject, as someone who paints and writes, I resent the intellectual kidnapping of art by what I call the university crowd. I hate that it's a subject at places like Columbia University. The artists I like best in history didn't go to Columbia. They didn't study drama at Yale. They wrote, they painted, they perfected their craft, but in the context of other artists, not taught as an academic subject.
Right. Yeah.
It's
I agree.
Just point.
Right. And I would agree about that in a variety of disciplines.
Yeah. The essential reaction to art is the sort of the wow factor, not does this advance the cause of the LGBTQ community or get people to believe in Jesus or make people conscious of the persecution of the black minority. Those are all worth addressing. But what's also worth addressing is, wow, that's beautiful. Because otherwise, what's the point of all that other stuff?
Yeah.
If it's not toward a destination that's bigger than that, then what's the context in which we fight for these other things? And so I think we give away the argument, as it were, by making everything as small as our politics and our sin and our evil. Once in a while, you've got to say, yeah, but just look at this. Look at what they're doing. Or the joy of, say, the communal expression you're going to do here at Wild Goose.
Yeah.
I mean, the point of it is the making of it. It
Right.
isn't so much that someone's sitting there saying, wow, I've really changed my mind on race relations now.
Yeah.
It's more, is this what it is to be a human being? I feel it more deeply.
Right. Exactly.
Which is why we
I feel
care
it more
about
deeply. Yeah.
those other issues.
Right.
But it can't all just be the meat and potatoes of politics.
Right. Right.
That's my view.
Yeah.
Great ending statement.
There we are.
Thank you.
Cool.
I think we're done.
Good.
Did you enjoy that?
I did.